Okay, sorry. Just to be clear, you're telling me that you think that the Chainsaw Devil, who has literal chainsaws for arms, isn't actually the Chainsaw Devil.
Oh no, I don't just think it. I can prove it. Alright, that's enough. Now you're doing too much.
Oh, my bad.
All good, no worries. Today we have a slightly different kind of video, but it's something I've been thinking about and wanted to talk about for a long time. But do you actually think that Pochita is the Chainsaw Devil? I've been skeptical about it for a while because it just seems like such an odd classification for him, and I'm not alone either. There are other YouTube videos or Reddit threads talking about this exact topic, however I've come to a conclusion that I haven't seen anywhere else. But before we continue, I'd like to offer a disclaimer. If you're not into this type of video, or you think that just since we've been giving the information that Pochita is the Chainsaw Devil that theories or speculations are stupid, then this just isn't the video for you. There will also be spoilers here and there for part 1 of Chainsaw Man. Got it? Great. Let's dive in. So, first things first, why do people think that it's possible that Pochita or Chainsaw Man isn't actually the Chainsaw Devil? Well, there are a few different reasons, but one of the main ones is the powers that come with Chainsaw Man. Every devil in the world of CSM has powers that correlate to its identity or essence as a devil. For example, Makima is the Conquest or the Control Devil, and therefore has abilities that allow her to control other people. She can make contracts and make people beneath her bend to her will. However, Chainsaw Man's special ability is the power to erase devil concepts from existence if he consumes them. Makima mentions that the Sixth Sense, Nazis, AIDS, and various other things are all the concepts that have been completely erased from existence as if they'd never been real at all. That's why within the world of Chainsaw Man, people are unable to recollect these ideas. Another thing that's made many skeptical is the sheer power that Chainsaw Man has. Chainsaw Man is consistently treated and given statements or feats that put him on par or stronger than even the most powerful devils we've seen thus far. It was stated that the four horsemen, Conquest, War, Famine, and Death, fought against Chainsaw Man and lost 26 times. The four sisters are easily the strongest four devils that exist within the world of Chainsaw Man, and so they reasonably demand a lot of fear. They're primal fears after all, and so it's a bit out of left field that the one that's able to compete with them is an entity born out of humanity's fear of chainsaws. Compared to concepts like death, chainsaws just seem to be so much less intimidating. Reasonably, a chainsaw shouldn't be able to contend with those four other concepts, much less consistently have won battles. This has led to a bunch of prevailing theories online, and I'll be going over a few along with some of the reasonable logic to get there, since it's very important for figuring out how people draw these conclusions. The first one that I've seen a lot online is that Pochita is the Oblivion or the Destruction Devil. This fits very seamlessly into his central power, that being the ability to remove things from existence. In the truest sense of the word, they are completely destroyed as if they were never real in the first place. It's also a concept or an idea that very much could reasonably derive as much fear as war or conquest or famine, so Pochita's abilities and power level would line up pretty cleanly if this were the case. This is also where a very consistent piece of every theory comes into play, and that's the idea that the chainsaw isn't necessarily indicative of him being a creature born of chainsaws, but rather that the chainsaw symbolically represents some other concepts. Therefore, chainsaws being used to cut down trees is an inherently destructive thing, so the idea of destruction is expressed through the chainsaw. Funnily enough, there's also some biblical concepts that would back this identity up. Obviously, the four sisters are based on the four horsemen, which have slightly different iterations depending on religion, but the most popular are the depictions we see in Revelation 6. They're the collective effects of one of the seven seals being broken, each reflected in verses 2, which is conquest, 4, which is war, 5 through 6, which is famine, and 8, which is death. Obvious inspiration is obvious. But a few chapters later, in chapter 9, we see a demon who's known as the king over the demonic entities that spill out of a place known as the Abyss. That title could be somewhat indicative of Pochita's Hero of Hell title, but the kicker for the Oblivion Devil connection is the name of the king of the Abyss. Abaddon in Hebrew or Apollyon in Greek means the destroyer or destruction or ruin. It's also used to name a location, but either way the coincidence is interesting. And assuming that Fujimoto is aware of the four horsemen enough to put them in his story, reasonably he would be aware of this demon as well. However, that's where the resemblance stops. While Pochita as a character is empathetic, caring, and ultimately a kind soul, the best that Abaddon gets, regardless of iteration, is just an agent of nature, destroying in the natural cycle of creation. While obviously Chainsaw Man is not a retelling of the events of Revelation and therefore he could just be possibly reinventing the character, I think that it's super inconsistent with Pochita's personality. Remember that devils are not inherently evil in CSM's world. The term devil is simply used to refer to any entity born out of humanity's collective fear toward a concept. Nothing more and nothing less. Some of them are evil, but others aren't, and even more are neutral or simply acting according to their nature. This is most visible when taking a look at what's actually important to Pochita's identity, even more than power or ability. Pochita's dream is revealed to us in chapter 97, and it lets us know exactly what he really wanted all along was to be hugged. Why exactly this is the case is not answered explicitly. It could be because he was simply too powerful that those who tried to get close to him would just end up dead. Regardless, both the nature of his power and this insight into his character has brought up some interesting angles to approach this potential true identity of Chainsaw Man. The theory would need to have close connections with others and the ability to erase things from existence, and those are both linked to the Forgotten Devil theory. This is the idea that the reason that Pochita calls himself the Chainsaw Devil is because he was a devil that is completely forgotten. This would explain his desire for closeness and can kind of explain his special ability, and can also explain why Pochita is so unbelievably strong. Presumably, for something to be even in the realm of the Four Horsemen, the fear would need to be at least conceptually or reasonably able to elicit equal to greater fear than them. And for some, being forgotten while dead or alive is terrifying. But honestly, out of all the conclusions we're discussing today, I like this one by far the least. The idea that Pochita is the Forgotten Devil and just chooses to stay unknown by his true identity despite actively wanting connection is a bit strange. I also think that while this being the reason he's so strong is interesting, it kind of feels like a bit of reaching for everything else. The Loneliness Devil was another prevailing theory using these kinds of ideas, but that one is pretty much cooked now that we've seen the Loneliness Fiend. Even more, it sort of forces symbolic interpretations for the expressions of a chainsaw that can be a bit out there. I can, I guess, sort of see the idea that chainsaws destroying nature makes each individual, tree forgotten, but I hate that. Anyway, speaking of chainsaw interpretations, that brings us to the Progress Devil theory. This one is a bit more creative, but still logical when it comes down to what the chainsaw could represent from a symbolic perspective. The idea is that chainsaws conceptually mark a pretty significant point in humanity's progress. Instead of using handsaws, axes, or whatever else, industrial chainsaws serve as a revolutionary way for humans to swiftly and dominantly change everything around them. They could harvest forests and create new homes for a large, growing population. Ideas like this, plus agricultural developments, would have meant that there were consistent and fast ways for people to provide shelter and move forward in collectively larger groups, thus leading to larger cities and a bigger population. Chainsaw Man's special ability would also kind of make sense, with destroying the old for something new matching up with how Makima wants to use Pochita's powers. But once again, the Progress Devil gets a bit clunky thinking about how that would tie into Pochita's desire. I guess there's a line where you could say that he wants to progress from not having a connection to having one, but it's a bit weird. Also, while I do think people were at one time a bit afraid of progress, it's far outweighed by the people who accept progress and want it to be part of life. Advancement in medicine, living technology are more often praised and desired more than feared. Regardless, I don't like all three of the ones that we've listed so far, but they are interesting in finding what definitions surrounding Pochita are flexible and have wiggle room for forming our own conclusions. I've watched the theory channels for years, but I don't consider myself a theorist outside of just using that title to assimilate myself as a fan. But I am a writer. So I decided to take a step back and pretend I could see the entire charting of the story and look at what specific areas had flexibility, which is partly why I think taking Pochita to be the Chainsaw Devil at face value is hard for some people. However, while Fujimoto is a strange man, he's never really illogical. Fire Punch seems like it should be about a man who punches things with fire powers, but it's not. It's about a man who has regeneration and is constantly lit on fire. If I asked you to tell me a story using only the title Fire Punch, you might go about it the way that makes natural sense, but Fujimoto doesn't. So I decided to go back and read some of the early chapters of Chainsaw Man. I figured it would be a creative twist that would be obvious in retrospect. Something that if we were given a different definition would be comically obvious but still perfectly hidden in plain sight. I just needed an identity that 1. Remains plausibly connected to Pochita's dream, 2. Could reasonably be feared and therefore powerful, 3. Symbolically could be expressed through the manifestation of a chainsaw, And 4, overall would be a twist that adds to the story that we've seen so far. And as I searched, one word kept seeming to jump off the panels to the extent that I couldn't stop thinking about it. See, I think that Pochita is the dream devil. Not that dream. See, throughout the initial chapters of Chainsaw Man, what thematically stood out to me and many others is the desires that Denji has. Almost everyone sees this, and its primary role is to tell us what Denji wants and how he operates. Some of the first words that we see from him when discussing his desires are, quote, "Well, normalcy is just a dream for us though." Later on he talks about what dream he's gonna find when he goes to sleep, and then is saddened when he's not even allowed to dream just a little. After he's killed by the zombie devil, he tells Pochita, quote, "Fulfill my dreams for me." To which Pochita replies, quote, "I liked hearing your dreams, Denji. This is a contract. I'll be your heart. In exchange, show me more of your dreams." I found it interesting not only the frequency by which this idea of dreams is used in the first chapter, but also the context and how it's used. It almost feels like Pochita has a natural draw to the idea of dreams, which we end up learning is quite close to his own dream of being hugged. Later on in chapter 150, Pochita shows up again to talk to Dennis and says, quote, "Okay Denji, our dream came true. What will you dream of next?" The idea of Pochita being the dream devil would not only recontextualize these moments and the word choice / phrasing to seem more poignant, but would also allow for the flexibility of Pochita's motivations to adapt and grow over time while still remaining fundamentally true to his secret identity, because dreams can be anything. Which leads me to some other points that I think are interesting. When we take a look at Makima's goal and Denji's goals, they both center and hinge around using Pochita to achieve them. Without him, their personal dreams cannot come to fruition. And I think that there's enough potential foreshadowing and thematic compatibility in terms of the writing axis for Pochita to be the dream devil, but what about everything else? Well, the idea that dreams are expressed through a chainsaw would then communicate something very interesting. That being, chainsaws are when humanity started to dominate nature. Homes were able to be built quicker and lumber was more accessible, which meant that communities could create long-lasting locations and eventually things could industrialize. Before that, communities were smaller, shelter was harder to come by, and the focus of life was not so much about living, but it was about surviving. The chainsaw, being a mechanical automatic machine, would then represent the turning point by which humanity started to earn agency over the natural forces through ingenuity. And since life was about living instead of surviving now, dreams were allowed to flourish. Just think about how Denji's life was before and after Pochita. Regarding Pochita's ability to erase concepts from existence, I think that dreams can also symbolically be linked to these as well. Through the dreams of humanity, the world can change or flip on its head. It can reshape the world that we live in. Likewise, Chainsaw Man is able to reshape the world. That's pretty much all Makima wants to use him for in terms of her dream, to reshape the world that she lives in where there is no death, fear, or hunger. And although dreams themselves don't traditionally generate much fear from humanity, the ability for one person's dreams or desires to destroy or reshape everything would very much stoke the fear of devils. Maybe humanity isn't afraid of the power of dreams and what they entail, but the Four Horsemen definitely are. And if the sisters themselves are scared of Pochita, that would make him incredibly powerful. And the best part about that is, we know that's not even speculation. Makima knows that she's not as powerful as Pochita. She fears what he's capable of doing. Humanity would be the ones granting power to the sisters, sure, but the sisters would be the one granting power to Chainsaw Man. Additionally, the method by which he accomplishes this idea of conception could make some logical sense as well. In lots of mythology, the idea of conception has been used to communicate either destruction, erasure, or temporary quote-unquote rewriting of events. Kronos from Greek mythology eats his children to prevent them from taking over, and that eventually they are allowed freedom once again once he vomits them up. Very similarly to how Chainsaw Man behaves when vomiting up the Snow Devil. There's also entities like Fenrir, who's a dog by the way, who in some iterations of the story consumes the sun and swallows Odin, thus causing the destruction of the world, Ragnarok. Obviously, there isn't an entity or an idea that works one-to-one on Pochita being the Dream Devil, but I do think that various strings of logic can work together and have enough areas of inspiration for Fujimoto if he wanted to make this a twist reveal. And that's why I think theories like this are so interesting, because we already know Fujimoto is unpredictable, but a lot of people are willing to write off oddities like Chainsaw Man's raw power or his ability when we already know that Fujimoto is a loose cannon, and predicting him will take really creative and out-of-the-box thinking. So that's it. That's the theory. Fujimoto has been lying to you and everything you know is wrong. Chainsaw Man is not the Chainsaw Devil, which is what I would say if I didn't have an extra theory that presents him as the Chainsaw Devil, just not in the way we would normally think of. While I think the Dream Devil theory is solid, I can't say that Pochita staying as the Chainsaw Devil doesn't make sense if Fujimoto intended to use the original idea of chainsaws in his design. This is an original chainsaw, and what they were designed for was actually a medical tool used to open the birth canals of women who were in labor. Yeah. Anyway, while that certainly does elicit a ton of fear and the idea is horrifying, I think that something it also does do is recontextualize what Chainsaw Man's origins would be. He would have been born out of the fear of this item. The original use of a chainsaw was to see if something was allowed to live or die, which isn't too far off from the ability that removes things from existence, as if they were never born. Anyway, I just wanted to throw in that sick bit of history. I hope you enjoyed, and there will be a Denji and Rizy video coming up once the movie drops. Subscribe to stay tuned. And until next time, keep dreaming.